Blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining me. And today, my special guest is Robert Alexis Pavlick. And I met Alexis online and Facebook, or it was it Facebook, Alexis, that we
YouTube.
met? Was it YouTube? But
And then
you
we
are
met
on, yeah, you are on Facebook too. So we
Facebook
talk,
as
yeah.
well, and then through a mutual organization that we're both connected with.
Oh yeah, the Saint Paisios Brotherhood,
Right,
which is
right.
Father Hans Jacobsy, who I've interviewed here.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, and it's interesting because we're of different generations, but we have a lot in common. So where just to start out, where people get to know you a little bit, where and if you don't mind saying where and when were you born?
Well, I was born here in Bridgeport, Connecticut, June 3rd, 1947. So yeah,
Wow.
I am a different generation.
You're a baby boomer.
Oh yeah, and a flower child, and
Yes.
all the rest of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what were you raised in any kind of religion or were you baptized as a kid or what was your like religious upbringing?
I was baptized, but it was a strange situation. My father's family were all Russian Orthodox.
Huh.
In fact, my great grandparents founded the first Orthodox church here in Bridgeport. Well, I mean, they co-founded it. There were 20 other couples, and the cornerstone was laid by now Saint Alexis Toth of Wilkes-Barre, and that was back in 1895. So my great grandparents, were very religious and very Orthodox, and my father was raised that way. My mother was English,
Hmm.
and she was raised in England with really nothing, not even the Anglican Church. She was uh, well, she was the result of an unwed mother, and so she never knew who her father was. And
Hmm.
so, when I was growing up, I wasn't really raised with any religion because my mother was adverse to me being Russian Orthodox. And my father worked a lot, and he didn't want to force the issue either. And so I grew up with no religion. And yet, oddly, here's the strange part. I remember as a little child sitting drawing pictures. And most children would draw pictures of trees and mommy and daddy, or their dog or whatever. And I always drew pictures of this light-haired man sitting in a throne with a rainbow over the top of the throne and all these steps going up. And my my mother kept asking me, she said, "What is that?" And I says, "It's God. It's
Sweet.
God." And so from, like, 4 years of age, I had this longing for God. And
Hmm.
I didn't really know who God was, but there was always that longing there. And my great grandmother, my Carpatho-Russian great grandmother, my mother. I just want to show you a quick picture because this is how I started out life. If you
Oh,
can,
cute. Oh, cute kid.
I look at that picture, and even in my more recent years, before I became Orthodox, I would look at that picture and I would weep
Oh.
because you look at that picture and you see an innocent, sweet young soul uh, wanting to get on with life and wanting to totally trusting, totally innocent. And when I think of what I did to myself
Oh.
over 50, 60 years, how I all but destroyed that child.
Oh.
And like I say, there were times when it would make me weep, and I think that's what led me back to church again. I said, how could I do that to that child, that beautiful little child?
Yeah.
And my feeling is that, that's the way God creates us all. He creates us innocent. The Orthodox Church teaches that actually that he creates children sinless.
Yes.
Uh, we don't believe in original sin. And so that, I mean, that's a wonderful eye opener. And I hope a lot of people listening in today will sort of take note on that, that the Orthodox Church does not teach original sin. Orthodox Church teaches that children are born basically sinless. They're born at a disadvantage because of what Adam did,
Right.
uh, because they're born into a corrupt world. But they themselves do not have sin until they come of age and create their own sins.
Uh, yeah, coming myself, being born and raised Roman Catholic, I still haven't quite wrapped my head around that. So I actually was just reading about that the other day, inherited sin and original sin, and it's it's so contrary to the way that I was raised. I don't, but I'm trying. So I
Yeah.
haven't been Orthodox even for a year. Now how long? Now, were you baptized into any church?
Well, oddly enough, my parents wanted all their kids baptized, I guess.
Okay.
So, and they lived in Easton, Connecticut. And the only church in Easton, Connecticut back then was the Congregational Church.
Oh,
So they took us all to the Congregational Church and had us baptized, but we
oh,
really weren't congregational.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So you were never, as a child, formally received into the Orthodox
Oh
Church,
no,
or
no,
never practiced Orthodoxy.
no, no, never practiced really anything
Wow.
until I'd say I was around maybe 12, and my brother was like 16, 17, and my brother was heavily into puberty and getting into a lot of trouble. And at that
Uh,
point, my mother figured we better start going to some kind of a church. And so we started going to the Congregational Church, the local Congregational Church. And oddly, to my mother's dismay, that wasn't much help,
mm,
because she was hoping that the minister of the Congregational Church would, calm my brother down, who was becoming quite promiscuous. And instead, the minister in the Congregational Church told my brother that he was okay, and that what he was doing was perfectly okay, because even Jesus was an illegitimate child.
oh, really?
Do
Okay.
you believe that?
Yeah, I do. Now, where was your dad when all this was going on? Your father?
Well, my dad was a wonderful man in that he was responsible, and he was faithful to my mother. And he was a great provider. He was the only provider. Back then you didn't have the mother and the father working and everything. He provided for all of us, and he provided adequately. But in order to do that, he worked outrageous hours. He worked for the local electric company, and he
Oh,
did all the maintenance on their turbines and so forth. So he
oh,
was like on call, and he worked constantly. So he wasn't around much. And of course, like I say, he, even though he loved the Orthodox Church that he was christened into, he had no time to go to church. He worked Sundays.
that sounds a lot like my father. Very, very, very similar. Now, how many siblings? So you had a brother. Who?
There was a sister who died before I was born.
Oh, I'm
Uh,
sorry.
my, my
Oh,
parents' first child was a little girl that was born in 1933. And
oh,
on her ninth birthday, she died of leukemia.
oh no. Okay.
And that threw both of my parents. My father had a nervous breakdown.
Wow.
My mother didn't, but it might have been better if she had, because then she developed serious mental disorders after that, and simply became so obsessed with the daughter that she lost. And you
Wow.
see, now this is where this plays into me.
I'm already connecting the dots.
Yes, yes. Countless times when I was difficult, feeding. I didn't like to eat back then. I like to eat now, but back then I was difficult at feeding times and so forth. And my mother would be trying to force the food into me, and she'd be saying, "Eat, eat, or you'll die like your sister died." Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And then there were other times when I displeased her when she'd say, how did I end up with, including my brother, how did I end up with these two ungrateful boys? Yeah, and my dear little saint, my daughter's dead,
Oh.
and and at times she even expressed to me that this last pregnancy, which was me, that they had prayed and prayed and prayed for another daughter.
Mm.
And that kept coming up and kept coming up. How much she missed her daughter. So, how do you think a 4-year-old deals with that? You know, the 4-year-old feels that they're a disappointment to their parents, and maybe their parents would be happier if he were more like his sister that died.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-mm-mm. Now, what was your childhood? Childhood, that's kind of a big question. What was your childhood like? Were you like a good student? Were you into sports or what were you like a little bit? Just
Well, no, there again, like I say, during my early childhood, and this is part of the problem too, that leads to other problems down the line. Like I say, because my mother had these mental issues and my father was working, I was left alone a lot.
mm,
I was left in the house in a playpen where my mother felt I was safe, and then she would go next door, and have coffee with the neighbors next door and console herself. Meanwhile, I was always very frightened and very lonely, and
yeah,
it was just Bob and the teddy bear, you
yeah.
know, in the playpen, and that's when I began doing strange things. I began, oddly enough, being like a mother to the teddy bear. I was like nursing the teddy bear,
Oh,
and that's when, and this is very, very strange. And I brought this up to therapists and priests afterwards that I can remember at an age as young as 4 starting to explore myself,
uh,
starting to find that various parts of my body gave me unusual sensations. And so, even though, yeah, I was nowhere near puberty, and it wasn't technically sexual because I had no idea what sexuality was, still I began basically self-pleasuring myself at a very, very young age.
yeah.
Uh, and I often wondered about that, like how that could be possible. And then our mutual friend, Father Hans, told me point blank. He says, "Well, of course you did." He said, "You were starved for love, so you gave yourself love." Yeah,
Well, a lot of trauma. Yeah.
yeah.
Now, when you were in school, what was that like? Grammar school and high school and um,
Well, that was equally difficult because, like I said, I hadn't been prepared for any of those things. All the other kids could at least do the rudiments of playing baseball and basketball and football and all these things that their fathers had taught them or their siblings had taught them, and I was, the two teams would choose who wouldn't get me. Yeah.
oh, that
uh
that is a story that yeah played out in my life, and I've heard it 100 times. But yeah,
yeah, so it was like I was totally rejected because nobody wanted me on their team, you know.
yeah.
And so, I just sort of withdrew into my own world, Yeah. And then all
Where
throughout high school, because I hadn't developed, over the years, a lot of overtly masculine traits, people were always a little bit suspicious. And of course, this was all before gay liberation and all those things, so nobody used the term gay, but it would always be, if in gym class I'd run for the horse with the pommels, and I'd stop short every time before going over the horse, and
yeah,
I'd hear people, mumbling, "Bobby's a sissy, Bobby's a sissy,"
yeah,
But I says, "Yes, I'm the one that's going to get injured if I don't make it over that horse," and
poor
I never
kid.
got the confidence, that I could do anything physically.
Yeah, where's your brother during this time? What's he
Well,
doing?
that was
He was doing his, well, you kind of intimated at that. He's doing his
Yeah,
own
he
thing.
was
Yeah.
doing his own thing. And it's funny because even with my brother, I wanted so much to be close to him. Uh,
Mm,
5 years difference. Yeah. My brother was obsessed with electric trains and collecting electric trains, and he had his bedroom. It was like the trains took up 2/3 of the bedroom, and he could barely move, you know. And so I was always being shrewd. I wanted to be with him. I wanted a friend. I wanted to be close to somebody. So I was always trying to con my brother into saying, well, why don't we put all our trains in one bedroom and you and I can share a room, you know? And
hmm.
my brother wouldn't have, you know. My brother was never close to me. You know, he was always in his own world and very distant, and was never close to me. The only one that was close to me was my mother, despite all of her emotional problems. But she clung to me, and she, I mean, God bless her. I'm not condemning her by any means. I understand where she was coming from. That she was coming from a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. Uh, but she clung to me, and beyond that, she almost kept me from my father and kept me from my brother. It's like she wanted me all to herself. Yeah. And I was okay with that because she taught me a lot of things, you know. She taught me, well, all the things that she liked. She taught me about, you know, her background, English history. And so I learned the entire lineage of the English kings. And she taught me about fine china and art and music
Hmm.
and beauty and all these things, you know, that were all considered by many as being more feminine things, you know. So there was nothing in my relationship with my mother that again would have helped me to grow up as a young man.
Correct.
And yet, I do have to say this: years later, when I went to a therapist, the therapist suggested that I go to her grave and tell her, you know, that she was wrong and that she shouldn't have raised me that way. And I said to the therapist, I said, you know, I said, yes, she was wrong in keeping me from my father, but you know what? I'm glad that I like beautiful music, and I'm glad that I like art, and I'm glad that I was brought up as a gentleman. I says I would never trade that, you know.
Hmm.
Gentleman and loving art and loving beauty does not have to equate with being gay.
Of
You
course
know,
not.
too many people create these stereotypes and assume that anybody that likes good music or literature or poetry is automatically gay, and that's simply not true.
No, no. The the thing that rings out very clearly when you're recounting your story there is that there's something that I call, no offense, there's something that I've called the classic gay boy syndrome.
Yeah.
And there tends to be, and I've kind of organized it this way, there tends to be three aspects to that story. Number one, there's a absent, abusive, critical, or disengaged father. There tends to be a overprotective, um, overly involved mother. And then three, tends to be some sort of trauma, abuse, or like early or a death, or early exposure to pornography or something like that. And what I've noticed is that um, young men that later come out as gay tend to have at least one of those, typically three. And I had all three too, and it sounds like you did as well. So yeah, so it disadvantages you. It sort of sets you up, and there's it's interesting too when you hear listening to you recount your story, because I think when you're going through that as a boy, it feels very particular to you. Like you're probably the only person that is going through this or ever has. But what one of the things that's attractive about the gay male community is the sense of trauma bonding, because there's so many other guys that had the same background as you. But what's also peculiar about it is because you're in a community of people who had a shared upbringing, it's not considered, abnormal or dysfunctional that you had a distant father or you had a coin mother or anything like that. So it's strange. So where you have this sort of shared sense of of trauma or suffering, although at the same time it's considered normal. It's sort of strange. So does that make sense?
It's exactly true, Joseph, because what eventually evolved was as I moved into puberty, like you say, there were very few people that would associate with me, very few males that would associate with me in school. And of the few that associated with me, they were all on the verge of experimentation. And oddly enough, the people that did accept me had a reason for that. And they would gather in the woods at the end of our street.
Oh dear.
They would engage in sexual practices with one another.
Oh dear. Okay.
And I was invited to join in to that. And being desperately lonely and having no friends, I
Uh,
found out early that I could make friends as long as I gave sexual favors.
were these males you're talking about?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, the end result of all that, the end result of 2 years of bonding with these other males in the neighborhood, was that after about 2 years, they moved on. And all of a sudden, they became interested in girls. This was like the junior high school period. And as they moved on, of course, then they all rejected me. And that made my lot in life even worse, because when we'd get off the school buses in the schoolyard in junior high school, they'd all gather together and they'd point. And at that point, they already had some terms. They didn't have gay, but they'd all point and say, Pavlick's a faggot.
Yeah,
Pavlick's
yeah,
a faggot. And
yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, yeah, well, you didn't seem to mind me last week, did you? I was all fine last week when I was taking care of your needs. Now, all of a sudden, I'm the outcast, And so I was actually, brought out or sexualized by straight boys. They weren't gay boys at all.
Right, right. We're in like the 1960s now, which, yeah,
Yeah, that would have been maybe 1959, 1960, somewhere in there. Yeah,
that
yeah,
early. Okay.
yeah.
Wow. Now, did you go to college? Did you leave home? Did you work?
No, that's where
What?
you were mentioning before. Then comes a trauma. Yeah,
Oh,
trauma came when my mother, unbeknownst to me.
well, Robert, just real quick. I mean, I see your early childhood was rife with trauma because of the death of your sister
Yeah,
and the mental health issues of your parents. I mean, that's unbelievably difficult for a child. So, I mean, but I don't mean to interrupt you, but also it tends to be the case with young men who later become gay, is that there tends to be layers of trauma.
oh yeah, yeah,
There's not just one single. It's like there's PTSD and then there's CPTSD, which is complex because it's not just one singular event which traumatizes you. It tends to be layers.
right.
Yeah. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, so like I said, what finally happened is, of course, during all of these things, as I mentioned earlier, I had been totally dependent on my mother for any kind of mental soothing or regeneration or whatever. And my mother, between 1960 and 1962, developed serious kidney complications. And back then, they did not have dialysis or anything. And my father never let on as to how sick she was. And again, even though we weren't going to church or anything, I was deeply religious. So I was praying and praying and praying and making all kinds of deals with God. Just let me keep her for even a few years, even if it's just a few years, and I'll do anything you want. I'll become a priest. I'll do anything you want, And I felt absolutely certain, that God would spare her. And in May, right after Mother's Day of 1962, she died.
Mm.
And when she died, my whole life fell. I didn't know what to do.
How old are you?
I was 14.
Oh,
I was
wow.
14, and I remember just going into my room because I was on the phone with a friend. I was off from school that day, and my father came in from work at an unusual time, And I'm on the phone, and my father says, "Get off the phone." Yeah. And I said, "Yeah, I'll be off in just a minute, Dad." He says, "No, get off the phone now. Your mother's dead." Yeah. And I was like, I didn't know I was so destroyed. I went in my room. And I remember I was just holding my head and swaying and saying, "Oh my God, oh my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? My father will send me away. Where will I go? What will become of me?" Because that's the way I felt. I felt that my father would send me away to my mother's relatives or something. And my brother was away at college. And we went through the whole funeral thing. And I just couldn't relate to anybody. I couldn't relate to any of the people at the funeral. I couldn't relate to anything. And I was angry at God because I felt that God had failed me. And so
Mm.
I had nothing. I had my mother, and now I didn't have God. And my father and my brother and I all mourned separately
Mm.
instead of, coming together and mourning together. We all mourned separately. So it was just a terrible, terrible trauma. Uh, and that led to complications down the line, which, if we have time, we'll get into.
Another trauma. And yeah, no, did you follow your brother and go to college, or what did you do? Or
No, because, like I say, what came next, and I'll try to be brief.
no, no,
Uh,
no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I went into like deep hatred and atheism. Yeah. Uh,
Oh.
because I couldn't imagine how God could have done that to me. But of course, God doesn't do things to people. Things just happen. And but anyway, to make a long story short, I was home from school one day, and the doorbell rang, and two lovely ladies were standing on the front porch, and they were giving a little sermon. Their sermon for that day, like, they must have known I was there, was, all of us lose loved ones and everything and all. How would you feel if you knew that your loved ones who died are going to be resurrected within the next 10 years? Yeah. And Jesus is returning, and he's going to resurrect all the dead, and we'll all live together on a paradise earth. And that, well, that was what I was waiting for. And they turned out to be, it was Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, of course.
And I remember, I mean, I ate up everything that they said, and they were so clever, going verse by verse through the
Sure.
Bible and everything. And well, at least it gave me hope. And so I invited them back, and I remember my father wanted to go out shopping like three or 4 days later. And I said, "Oh, Dad, I'm sorry. I made an appointment. These two ladies are coming over tonight. He says, "Two ladies about what? Are they insurance salesmen?" Or, well, I said, "No, actually, they're two of Jehovah's Witnesses." And my father said, "Oh my God." He says, "You'll never get rid of them now, yeah." And you know what? I never did.
Wow.
I got totally hooked on the entire movement, hook, line, and sinker. And they convinced me that and I already had, I was an advanced placement student in high school. So I already had credits at the University of Connecticut,
Hmm.
and I could have gone to college and everything, but they convinced me that if I went to college, I'd lose my faith, that college would destroy my faith, and that the kingdom was right around the corner. So why do I want to be educated in a system that's going to end? You know, and I believed it. So instead of going to college, I went to their headquarters in Brooklyn, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and was there for 2 years printing Bibles and preaching and doing all these things, and until I saw through it all, and so I never did get to go to college.
Oh, so with them, did you kind of find a community or a family? So,
Well, I did. See, that was the thing that attracted me, because I still was, on the periphery with my father and my brother. And all of a sudden, I had brothers and sisters and mothers, and they would invite me for sleepovers at their homes, and I would wake up in the morning to the smell of coffee and brothers and sisters and all of us at the table praying, and oh, it was wonderful. I mean, don't get me wrong, the fellowship amongst Jehovah's Witnesses can be quite powerful.
yeah,
Uh, until you start, contradicting them. But yeah, I mean, so that part of it was good. That part of it was good. But eventually, I started seeing through a lot of it, and I couldn't deal with the constantly going from door to door, contradicting other people's faiths.
mhm,
And when I went from door to door in my little preaching routines, I found other people with just as deep a faith as mine,
yeah,
and in those cases, I felt that I should leave them alone and wish them well. But my elders didn't feel that way, and so when I finally refused to go out preaching anymore. They at that point they did what they call they disfellowshipped me for apostasy,
well,
and which is a
mm,
shunning
yeah.
thing. No Jehovah's Witness can talk to you or acknowledge you on the street, or you know.
Oh well.
So there was
What?
a there's another trauma.
Now, how old were you when you left the Jehovah's Witness? How old were you?
I'd say 22.
No, what did you do after that? What did you do?
Well, then I became hostile, because now the religion that I loved had betrayed me. So I
Yeah,
became hostile. I wanted no part in Christianity anymore.
yeah.
So I did the opposite extreme, and I became involved in the occult. Uh,
Wow.
I became involved in white witchcraft, or it's commonly known as Wicca.
Now how did you get into that? That's not something you just kind of trip or fall into because I mean I used to do that as well, but you know.
Yeah, well, I started roaming around the cities, and it was also at that time too. Now you have to realize that during this like 7 or 8 years that I've been with Jehovah's Witnesses, I never let on as to that I had these other sexual problems, sexual addiction problems.
Were you at that time were you acting out or were you
No,
no?
see, that's just it. Because I was so involved with Jehovah's Witnesses, I was celibate during that entire period. And so even in these sleepovers, when on occasion I would share a bed and with one of the young brothers, uh, and I did grow to really love them, but there was nothing sexual about it at all.
Right.
I never touched them. I never, because that was like unthinkable. So during that whole Jehovah's Witness period, I was able to maintain celibacy. Maybe not chastity. There was a little self love in between there. But I never touched any of them because I respected, the religion. So I was celibate during that whole period. But then when they threw me out, at that point I said, not for nothing, maybe it's time for me to explore the
Yeah.
other, the way other people live, and that's when I came out.
Right. Was
You
this
know?
in New? Were you still in New York City?
Now, at that point, I was back here in my home city.
Did no?
So I
Did you?
began, getting magazines and trying to find out where there were gay bars and
Well,
places that I could meet people and so forth. And
did your dad know what was going on, or no?
he didn't know about the gay aspect of it, but he was sort of relieved that I was no longer with Jehovah's Witnesses,
This.
and because uh, that had separated me from my family. My sister-in-law was Roman Catholic and had three nephews. And during that whole period when I was with the witnesses, they were constantly trying to wean me away from my family.
Of course.
And so, Christmas, they didn't celebrate Christmas, they didn't celebrate Easter, they didn't celebrate birthdays. So all those family gatherings and everything, I was absent from. And because I couldn't participate in that. And that was the amazing thing was, when it was all over and I was thrown out of Jehovah's Witnesses, I called my sister-in-law on the phone and told her, and she cried and she said, well, she says,
Oh,
welcome home. So I
nice.
said, well, isn't that something, that this evil Catholic that Jehovah's Witnesses warned me to stay away from welcomed me home
Oh,
after I was dismissive of her and her family for all those years.
mm.
And I was, I mean, it made me begin to really love my sister-in-law and and respect my family a little more.
Now you mentioned coming out. Now I came out in 1988, which was not a good time because and it was San Francisco, and it was the I wouldn't say the height, but at least the middle of the AIDS crisis. So it wasn't it in that period of time. It wasn't cool to be a gay man, especially because people didn't understand what was going on in terms
Yeah,
of AIDS. People were very fearful. They didn't want to touch you.
right, right.
Fear of getting AIDS. What? So so what? You came out in what, the '60s? What was that like? I
Well,
mean,
when I
I
say
mean,
coming,
in terms of like social acceptance or whatever, or finding a community, what was that? What was that like?
when I say coming out, what I really meant was I began meeting other gay people and engaging in my first sexual experiences again.
That's what it
I
is. Yeah,
didn't come out to anybody at that particular point. But then I began working for the local telephone company, and it was a strange situation because they had me as a customer service rep, and up to that point, there were no male customer service reps. So as a result of equal opportunity and all these things, they were like obligated to hire me for that. So here I was in this office of all these women and a lot of younger women and everything too, and they started hitting on me.
oh,
And I liked their friendship. And I would go out dancing with them. We'd go out to clubs and everything, on a Friday night. And one of them in particular was really hitting on me and really hitting on me. And I felt bad for her. I didn't want her to feel like there was something wrong with her. So I finally sat her down. She was like a sister to me. I really loved her. And I said, Eileen, I said, I can't go on like this. I said, I know you're trying to get me, you're finding every excuse for me to stay over. Oh, it's raining out. Why don't you stay over? Oh, it's snowing out. Why don't you stay over?
oh,
And I says, you must be wondering what's wrong with me. Why doesn't he hit on me? And so I explained it to her and she started laughing. She said, she said, I had sort of a gut feeling that something wasn't quite right. And she said, but that's fine. That's fine. She says, we can be like brother and sister. And so she made me comfortable at being honest with other people.
mm,
And then word sort of spread, and the other girls in the office realized that I was gay. But oddly enough, that was probably around 1972
wow,
when it was starting to become popular. It's like people that wanted to be like woke, like today. If you were woke, And if you were open-minded, you should have at least one Native American friend and one gay friend. Yeah.
Well,
So,
1973 was a big year. That was Roe v. Wade, but it was also uh, the APA declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder.
right.
That was a big year because
Yeah.
it was
And it
sort of
wasn't that long after the Stonewall riots, too.
that was 69, the year I was born.
Nine. Yeah.
And the so there was a different attitude right around that time about homosexuality, where before that it was sort of pathologized, where kind of what we're doing right now, which is um, sort of laying a psychological blueprint or framework for a homosexual. And then people weren't saying that you were born gay at that point, but there was sort of a general kind of consensus that homosexuality was not peculiar. It was just a variation, you
Yeah.
know. So, and then, I mean, I was a boy in the 70s in San Francisco, so I grew up in a very like gay saturated culture with the village people and all that stuff. I mean, homosexuality, not until the AIDS crisis came about was there any kind of negative connotation with
Right.
homosexuality. But in the 70s, not at all, you know.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is, all through all those periods, when I look back at my life now and I analyze it, uh, there were things that made me perhaps less masculine than other men. There were things that steered me into giving out sexual favors to men just to have friendship. Uh, but when I really look back at it all now, see, here's the thing that I've learned since then is that I can't say that I was overtly gay during all those periods because I remember growing up wanting nothing more than to eventually be married and have a family. During my early days of puberty, I used to steal my brother's Playboy magazines, and I would pleasure myself with my brother's Playboy magazines. I found especially big busty women very attractive, and had my first orgasm looking at a picture of a woman. So, like, how gay is that? You know, uh, I can see all these little signposts along the line where I could have gone either way, but something kept pushing me and pushing me in one direction. And it was always a direction towards homosexuality and also away from God, too. So it was like somebody was accomplishing uh, a purpose with what they were doing. Somebody was directing me from A to B to C to D to do everything within their power to alienate me from God and alienate me from any possibility of being heterosexual, yeah, or even
There's a
bisexual.
there's a lot of confusion in I mean, in general, childhood and adolescence is a confusing time in your life.
Yeah,
But for somebody that, you know, is a survivor of trauma or a victim of abuse, it's that times 1,000.
yeah,
So the confusion, you know, is kind of inherent. And when something presents itself, like let's say homosexuality or transgenderism, that that seems to answer a lot of questions. Well, I'm confused, or I'm unhappy, or I'm lonely, or
mhm,
I'm miserable, or I'm marginalized because I'm this way. That's why. And then that sort of, and I mean, certainly for me, then a lot of things click. Well, this is where I belong.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, because that's what happened. Especially after I was thrown out of Jehovah's Witnesses, I had no friends now. I had
Yeah.
absolutely no friends. So I did have a few friends, a few heterosexual friends at work. Uh, But I needed a bigger community, and I needed a sense of, like you say, like belonging to
Yeah.
something bigger. And so that's when I started, going religiously to gay bars and gay clubs and bathhouses and you name it, and threw myself into the movement so that going from being a preacher, uh, I en- I ended up here in New York City. Let's see,
Is that you?
marching. That's me marching with my Holocaust uniform to show that gay people died in the Holocaust too.
Oh,
And my
yeah.
little sign, we died in the Holocaust too, but there were no Schindlers to help us and no
Wow.
memorials for us.
Wow. Well, you were hardcore.
Oh
When
yeah, yeah.
when was
I
that?
became hardcore because I needed to be part of something bigger.
Well, you are in the gay community. I understand why young people who, because I think there's a misconception that, you know, young people who grow up like you described and like I've described, you know, um, at a loss, and it's not necessarily especially like when I went to the gay community during the AIDS era, that I was necessarily looking for sex, but you're looking for companionship, which I never had growing up. So, and here's this community of men, and a lot of them very good looking, and you have this immediate community, and it's like the best thing ever. I mean, in the beginning, it was the best thing ever for me.
Yeah,
So that's why people a lot of times, go in that direction because they're at a loss.
yeah. That's exactly how I got involved in it. And then, as fate would have it, a neighbor of mine who I had met at the gay bars, big weightlifter, I was obsessed with, but he wasn't obsessed with me. Uh, but we became good friends.
Yeah.
And he found the solution to everything. And he said, because he knew that I was, yes, I had somewhat of a sense of belonging in the LGBT community, but not really. Most of the time, I was just being taken advantage of by a lot of people, and I really wanted to settle down. I really wanted just one person. I wasn't really into promiscuity, and in order to be able to have multiple sexual situations and everything on weekends, I really had to depend on alcohol and drugs to do that because it really wasn't me. Yes, even when I was amongst Jehovah's Witnesses, there were some young men in the parish and mothers and all too that I sort of fell in love with. But I wasn't sexual with them. Love doesn't have to be sexual. And so I always had an intense feeling for people, but I wasn't getting that out of the gay community. So I finally, somebody that I knew through friends and met on a regular basis at get-togethers and so forth. I guess he was at the same point in his life too, and he asked me to marry him. Well, in
Well,
1977, there weren't any gay marriages. There was nothing legal like that going on anywhere, and and I didn't have a church and everything. So my friend Paul. He says, "Oh, have I got the answer for you?" He says, "There's a church in Bridgeport." He says, "The priest is gay, the organist is gay, the organist is the priest's lover." Uh, he says, "There's a large percentage of gay people in that church." He says, "You can be at home there." He says, "And the priest there would love to marry two gay men, yeah." And so in 1977, even though
wow.
it wasn't legalized, like by the government or anything at that point, myself and my partner Carl were married in the Episcopal Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Oh,
And
well, you were ahead of your time.
yeah, yeah. But it was what we both wanted because we we both wanted out of the drinking and the drugs and the
That happens a lot.
prostituting.
That happened to me. You get burned out and you're kind of
Yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah.
I need to do something. And I did that as well. Yeah.
And we simply felt, we weren't like madly in love,
Yeah.
but we felt that we could help each other
Yeah.
uh, to stay on the straight and narrow, and we would also be part of a church. So we were confirmed in the church by the Bishop of Connecticut, uh,
Wow.
who didn't know that we were going to get married, but and then we were married, and it worked out pretty good for a while, but then we got on each other's nerves and so forth. So it didn't last forever. Uh, but it was at that point too, when I was going to get married, that then I felt that I couldn't keep up the pretenses anymore. And that's when I finally decided to come out to my father
Oh,
because I wanted my father to be part of this.
oh boy.
And needless to say, my father flipped out. And initially he says, "Oh my God." His exact quote was, "You've disappointed me all your life, and
Wow.
you saved this one terrible last disappointment for my old age." But and of course
Well,
I was crushed.
of course.
And but there is a happy ending to that. Later on, my father and I made up, and we really finally became father and son. So I'm
That
thankful for that.
that happened to me as well. Now to I want to get to, I hate saying your conversion, but I had a very strong conversion. It was not like I always compare like an Augustinian conversion, like Saint Augustine, who it was very slow and it was very a long process where he, you know, his mother was praying for him, but he had this other life with his mistress and an illegitimate child, and he got involved with all these different religious sects and everything, and then finally he had this realization, but then there's Paul, Saint Paul, who was very much like I was very much like him. I was just kind of going about my business one day in the Castro in San Francisco, and then I just got hit by a bolt of lightning and was like, okay, well, everything's got to change from this point onward. Now, what was it like for you? Was it like a drawn out process, or was it quick?
Well, yeah, to be brief and so like run the film ahead. Eventually, I had some bad situations in the Episcopal Church,
Oh,
and the
oh,
Episcopal Church too kept getting more and more relaxed and more and more relaxed, and
damn.
and started getting ridiculous. Yeah, and and then there were run-ins with people and so forth. So I left the Episcopal Church, and I was unchurched for a number of years. But
Wow.
I always had that longing. I always had that longing, and I wanted another faith. And of course, in between, I had been involved with Buddhism, Zen Buddhism. I've been involved with gurus and Hindu teachers and all these different things, trying to find some faith community that I could connect myself to. But they all left me. They all left me dry. Many of them came close. Many of them had some interesting concepts, and they came close, but they were never. I always instinctively knew that something was missing. See, I didn't want something distant. I didn't want some deity out there. Or like in Buddhism, they really don't even believe in deity.
Yeah.
And there are no faith communities. Once you become hooked up with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi or whatever, he goes back to India, and now you have no faith community to worship with or anything. So I wanted a faith community, and I wanted a personal God, and I wanted that so bad. And then of course I was getting older too, and I was thinking about my future and mortality, and So I started snooping around on the internet. Now, see, the internet can be used for evil, but it can also be used for good.
Exactly.
And snooping on the internet, and I stumbled across my great grandparents' church, Holy Ghost Russian Orthodox Church. We're having streaming services on the internet. And I watched the streaming service and I said, oh, oh, gee, I never gave my grandparents' church a try. Let me check this out. And then I started watching YouTube. I started watching YouTube videos of Russian Orthodox monastics and Greek Orthodox monastics. And Orthodox gave me something that I had never experienced before. There was this richness and this fullness, and it was a different God. It wasn't the God throwing Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. It was the God that forgave Adam and Eve, and the God who from the very beginning, had plan B ready in case Adam and Eve failed him. The God that was willing to offer up his own son to save us. And I found that Orthodoxy was so much different from all the other Christian denominations that I had been in that always preached this angry God.
Mm.
And uh, and then I watched in particular, it was a service. It was around, I guess, around Easter or Pascha, and of course it was the whole Sunday of the prodigal son,
Mm.
and that image of the prodigal son who was me, and who ended up lying on the ground in the pigsty, and saying, "Oh my God, even my father's poorest servants are better off than me," and so he goes back to his father. And the thing that I found interesting, Joseph, in the prodigal son, I mean, there's the obvious part of the prodigal son that the father took his son back. But there's the part that maybe a lot of people don't think about. The prodigal son was coming down the road, and the father, like almost instinctively, knew it ahead of time. And the father ran out of the house, and he's running down the road with his arms outstretched to his son. And so the father met him more than halfway. And the father never said to his son, "Oh, so you ran out of money and now you want to come back to me, huh? Is that the deal?" Father never even questioned the son's motive. The father just loved him and embraced him and took him back. And I went hysterical watching, listening to that parable, and I broke down, and I just suddenly realized how much God loves us, and I started going to Holy Ghost Orthodox Church.
Oh.
And I asked, got in contact with the archpriest in New Haven, and I had catechetical studies with him. And he felt after a brief period of time that I was ready, and so I was chrismated within less than a year. Right after following Easter, it was April 30th of Pascha in 2022. So I've been Orthodox for about 18 months now. Yeah.
Oh, so you're kind of new like me. Now, your ancestors must have been praying for you. And
See
I think they were.
that picture that I showed you before of that little boy.
Yeah.
When my father gave that picture to his grandmother, she went nuts.
Oh.
She went absolutely nuts. And she said, "This little boy is a saint. This little boy is destined for something."
Wow.
She took the picture to the priest and had it blessed.
Wow.
And she had it on her little dresser with a candle burning. I'm sure that woman prayed for me for all those years, and my grandmother as well. And see, here's the interesting thing. I know a lot of people watching today probably don't believe in the incarnation of evil that we call Satan, but I do. And my feeling is that, see, Satan doesn't take notice of people that are already a mess because he's already got them. But he
Hmm.
saw that little child and he saw the promise in that little child, and he pursued that child from birth all the way down to age 75 and made sure that he would just keep funneling me from one false religion to another, from one negative experience to another, doing anything to destroy me and to make me hate God. And then he, at some point, he must have looked the other way when I discovered Holy Ghost,
Yeah,
and I escaped
yeah.
by God's grace.
When that's beautiful. Now, when you were looking at Orthodoxy, did you ever come? I'm just curious. Did you ever come across Father Seraphim Rose?
Oh yes, yes, and that see that also helped too. Not only Father Seraphim Rose, but Saint John of San Francisco,
Yes.
because Saint John of San Francisco was the saint who knew Father Rose's background and
Yeah.
knew what he was dealing with, and chrismated him anyway. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like he could have said, you're damaged goods. You could be a real risk, you know.
Exactly.
And he didn't. He didn't. Saint John, what a wonderful saint, and he accepted Blessed Seraphim Rose,
Yeah.
and Seraphim Rose. Uh, I'm sure had he lived long enough, would have been able to help a lot of people like us.
I think
By
so.
the same token, that's why I don't talk about it a lot. I don't like highlighting Blessed Seraphim Rose for the fact that he shared some commonalities with us.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd want to be remembered that way. But the fact is that he's living proof of what can happen if you surrender to God.
Hmm.
And
I
he had
think,
the same
yeah.
path as you and I. The Hinduism and Zen Buddhism and everything else and flower power and yeah, and he was a brilliant, brilliant man,
Yeah.
brilliant author, and yet he lived in total humility, uh, and he was much harder on himself than he was on his monks. He was very compassionate,
Hmm.
the monks that were under his care, you know. So yeah, I have an icon of Father Seraphim Rose and another one of Saint John, and I love them dearly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I think his reluctance maybe. I think you hit it on the head. I think his reluctance to share um, aspects of his past, I think it's rooted in humility because I think if people had been aware of what a rough road he had traveled,
yeah,
that would have garnered a lot of attention for him.
yeah,
I mean, undoubtedly, because people would have just looked at him. I mean, as an example, but just as somebody who had overcome a lot. And I don't think he wanted that. I don't think he wanted to be a celebrity priest.
no, no,
No, but he tried to help people in the way he could, and that's I think, and I I think it's kind of controversial where people talk about his past, but I think we're in a time where people need examples, and I don't feel like it's a big deal to, yeah, I don't think it should be overdone, but I think people need examples because you, you know when you're trying to um when you're trying to leave an old life like that, it's difficult enough, and there are few examples because not there's a lot of people who have overcome drug addictions or porn addictions or things like that, but are there many examples that, like, if somebody goes to, to social media or YouTube or whatever, somebody that left. homosexuality. There's not a lot.
Yeah,
That's still kind of a taboo subject because people, you don't do that. You're born that way and that's it, and you make the best of it.
yes.
So it was very comforting to me to read Father Seraphim's story because it was like, wow, somebody else was there before me, and what an example that he
Yeah,
set. So that's it. That's why I think it's good to talk about him.
yeah,
So
yeah, I agree with you because it made a difference for me too. Because it said to me, "Look at what is possible
exactly.
if you only surrender to God and let the Holy Spirit run your life." You
Yeah.
know, and that's exactly what Blessed Seraphim Rose did. Look at what's possible. Uh, Not even just Seraphim Rose, but like I say, St. John, San Francisco, and Shanghai. Uh, See, a lot of people look at Christianity and they see it as sort of useless. It's like, well, what does it do? Uh, and a lot of my friends even say this. Oh, all those miracles were 2,000 years ago and everything. Nothing happens now, and that's not true. That's
Yeah.
not true. There are 20th century saints, and it's just sad that nobody knows that they exist. St. John is a 20th century saint. St. Nectarios was a 20th century saint. St. Paisios is a 20th century saint. There's another little, I'm trying to think of his name. Is it Ephraim of somewhere in the Southwest who is up for canonization?
I don't know.
These are 20th century saints. And there are miracles. And God is turning people into like dear little Saint Paisios. There was a quote by him that I read somewhere. It was a prayer to God where he said, God, I don't know what you're going to do with me. All I ask of you is that you make me a human being. Yeah. And
That's sweet.
that was just so sweet and so loving. And I said, here are these amazing people, and they live
Exactly.
our lifetime, many of them. So no, Christianity is not
No,
dead, and
no.
it's not defunct by any means. Yeah.
I want to share my screen with you. Alexis, can you see this?
Mhm.
Oh, good. Now, you might not have gone to college, but you've gone to the school of hard knocks. So I mean, you've lived a lot of this stuff. I think your insight is important. And I'll try to go through these because I've kept you kind of long. I'll try to go through these, succinctly. I don't know if you're familiar with Randy Schultz. He was out here in San Francisco in the Castro the same time I was, and he wrote the book "And the Band Played On," which was about the early AIDS crisis. And I had read the book, early on, and I hadn't been impressed by it, but no particular part. I can't think of a particular part that struck me, but great books, you read them at different times in your life and they mean different things. And when I had gotten out of the gay community, I read it again, and there was a particular um, uh, uh, quote in it. He was talking about what sort of went wrong with the gay community, or sort of homosexuality in general. And people that are familiar with my work, they know I quote this a lot. But he said there's no moderating role like a woman plays in the heterosexual milieu. And I thought that was, and I thought of this line when you were talking about your relationship that you had, that it didn't work out, that you got on each other's nerves and you ended up breaking up. But I think that's a lot of times the case in the homosexuality. There's no compatibility between two men or two women like there is between a man and a woman. There's no complementary there, so it's really doomed from the beginning just to not work. And I think and the particular problem that you have with gay men is a lot of promiscuity, because women, although things have changed, women tend not to be as promiscuous as men. And when you get a bunch of men together, it's going to be a lot of fun. So it doesn't work.
No,
No.
because it can't work, because when you look at it from a spiritual point of view,
Yeah.
it's disordered. It's
Yes.
not part of God's plan, and people tend to look at like God's plan as being something totally separated from nature and everything, but it isn't. You know, there's such a thing as natural law. You have the law of gravity. Now, if you choose to jump off of a cliff, you're going to be dashed to pieces. And it won't be because God is mad at you. It will be because you violated natural law and you did it to yourself. And people don't realize that God's law is in fact natural law, that he had a plan for mankind. And yeah, he gave us free will, so you can walk away from that plan, but then your life's going to be all disordered and you're going to suffer for it. And you're not going to suffer. See, this is the important part to me. This is what makes me love God in my old age, is all the things that I suffered. God didn't do that to me. I suffered because I broke all the natural laws, and I suffered the consequences of that. God wasn't there like making people treat me bad or making people take advantage of me or whatever. God was more than likely standing behind me saying, Bobby, wake up and come home. Why are you putting yourself through this? Yeah. And that's the way I see the Lord now. I mean, I remember all those nights when I woke up the next morning with my car parked sideways in the parking lot. And I know now that Jesus drives a stick shift because I don't know how I got home, you know. Uh, and that's where, like now, like I say, I feel this tremendous sense of love for God, because I realized that he respected my free will so much that he refused to interfere with it. And he let me, do a lot of harm to myself. But just like with Job, if you read the accounts of Job in the Bible, he would only let the devil go so far. He said, well, you can do this and this and this, but you can't kill him. Yeah, God wouldn't allow Job to be killed, and he didn't allow me to be killed either. And but that's the amazing thing, that God should respect our free will. And so consequently, when things happen, when bad things happen, we say, oh, why did God let that happen? Well, for the most part, we brought it on ourselves. And we can't very well blame God. When you think of even in the future, when people talk about the last judgment and so forth, Scripture tells us that God does not desire that any should be destroyed.
Yeah.
And if it were up to him, no one would be destroyed. No one would be punished. And if people do end up being punished or destroyed, it's by their own choice. It's because they're choosing to reject him.
Yeah.
He has his arms open, just like on the cross, his arms are stretched out. He's there to take us home and accept us. But if we choose to reject that love, then we're really accountable for ourselves.
Yeah. I think too that in a lot of these circumstances, and I think this, your story as well, there's mitigating circumstances where there's early childhood abuse and trauma where I don't know the level of culpability a lot of times as well, and I think God understands that. Um, yeah, this is I thought this was interesting. This study is called Sexual Attraction, Fluidity, and Well-being in men. So it's just looking at men in general who seek out, psychological help that's, I think, grounded in a trauma-based approach, that the therapy can be effective because I think in this is kind of a un well, it's kind of an open secret, I think, in in the gay male community, but just the LGBT community in general, is that, and we talked about this with your story, there's a lot of underlying trauma. And I think when a lot of times when these people do seek out help, because there is a lot of psychological issues there, and I experienced this too in terms of therapy, is that the approach is that you're suffering from some sort of minority stress. Your parents didn't support your sexual orientation or your gender orientation, or you were raised in a religion that was unaccepting of your identity, but they don't dig any deeper beyond the surface. And I mean, because I was never asked in therapy if I had been sexually abused as a child, you know and I mean, that was like the first thing they should have brought up, and they never did. So,
The funny
so
thing, I could just interject this.
go
Well,
go ahead.
because like you say, a lot of people say, "Well, I was raised in a religion that wasn't accepting of my sexuality and everything." Well, there could be a variety of reasons for that. And what I'm realizing today, like I say, I probably chose the strictest church that I could have chosen to enter into, because the Orthodox Church, yeah, is firm in their stand on homosexuality, but that doesn't make them cruel. What people have to realize is, say, for example, you have a friend that's an anorexic. It's not loving to tell your 85-pound soaking wet friend, "Oh my God, Lucy, you are fat. You have to eat less." You know, it's not loving to bolster people's delusions.
Hmm.
It's cruel and it's dishonest. And what's happening to children in school, my goodness, I guess if they were doing in grammar school back in 1955 what they're doing now, I would have probably come out at age 8. You know,
Yeah, they
what
do now. They do.
they're taking advantage. Children, little children like to experiment. Little girls like to play with tractors, and little boys like to put on their mommy's high heels and so forth. Children are big on costumes. I've been a costume person all my life. But the fact that people like costumes and like to play act and so forth doesn't automatically make them gay. And it's wrong on the part of educators at the first sign of any kind of femininity in a little boy to say, "Oh, he should really be a girl, or he should be gay, or he should be this, or he should." No, no. Little children experiment. I mean, I even know myself, like I say, even with all my childhood things of nursing teddy bears and playing bride and things like that, all of which things were really sort of brought on by my mother, uh, that I was in no way prepared at age 8 to decide that I wanted my sex changed. Uh,
No,
so what they're doing to children is inconceivable and unforgivable,
I
and
agree.
is child mutilation.
I agree.
And how our government can condone it is beyond me.
Yeah. This is the American Psychological Association. It's interesting that they would make this concession.
Yeah.
What causes sexual orientation? They said there is no consensus among scientists, about what causes homosexuality. They had to admit it because there isn't. And although the gay community loves to say that people are born um, um, gay, And that's how they get away, I think, with like what you were talking about, confirming these little children in some sort of identity, because they just say, well, they were born that way, and they don't things have gotten so messy in in society right now that they don't. Well, I think they realize that children are being traumatized and abused, but they don't want to address it. So, and then this is a I thought this was interesting. This is mental health for non-heterosexual people, and this is in England. Um, so it says self-reported identification as non-heterosexual was associated with unhappiness, neurotic disorders, overall depressive episodes, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, phobic disorder, probable psychosis, suicidal thoughts and acts, self-harm, and alcohol and drug dependence. And why is this? I think nobody wants to address it. Why is that? So here's suicide ideation. Sexual minority participants were at greater risk of suicidality and self-harm than heterosexuals.
And what they'll say too, Joseph, is they'll try and say that, oh, well, the reason gays tend to be more, alcoholic and addicted to drugs and so forth is because of the persecution that
Yeah,
they experience at the hands of heterosexuals. But that's not entirely true because, like I said, I came out during a period when it was like everybody wanted to have a gay friend, to bring to a cocktail party or something. So it was almost somewhat accepted when I came out. And yet I still suffered from terrible shame because there were simply certain things. Like I say, I wanted a partner that I could love and take care of for the rest of my life. I didn't want one night stands, and I didn't
yeah,
want to be constantly abused, and I didn't want to have to engage in sexual practices that I considered like really gross. And but sort of had to do those things, and in order to do those things, I had to resort to drugs and alcohol because otherwise I couldn't function. I couldn't do those things.
yeah.
So consequently, it had nothing to do with me being persecuted by heterosexuals. It had everything to do with my own personal shame
Yeah.
that was being brought about by sort of, being forced to comply with activities that I really couldn't handle. You know, uh,
No.
so it's wrong for them to try and say that all of the shame and addiction and everything is because of non-acceptance, and if everybody just accepted everybody that was gay, then gays would stop being drug addicts and stop being alcoholics. No, no, there's almost a natural, because we know somehow instinctively that we're violating the natural order of things,
That
and so there's a sense of shame associated with that.
it goes back to that original quote that I had with Brandy Schultz, that there's just something inherently wrong here. And I think it just makes people unhappy, because I think you realize deep down that it's not working.
Yep.
This is a comparison of sexual behavior, because a lot of between gay men and straight men and women, because I think there's a misconception among a lot of straight people or allies or whatever you call them, is that the only difference between gay and straight is the partners. That's it. But I mean, gay men have much higher levels of 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 promiscuity. I thought this cohort was interesting because this is usually nowadays the age that guys settle down, so 35 to 39. So 72% are, forming new partnerships, regularly among gay men, but that number is only 21%, and 10% among straight men and women. It's a big difference, 72% as opposed
Yeah.
to 21 and 10. So it's not the same. That's my point there. This is one of the reasons why I had to get out of Catholicism. This is an archbishop, nonetheless, was holding a conference. I think it was this year, raising LGBTQ Catholic children. Is there anything more horrible than that? Why? Well, number one, my question is, why are they labeling little kids LGBTQ?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, talk about sexualizing kids. And then they want to raise them, i.e., sort of confirm them, i.e., groom them. Ugh.
Well, the other thing too, don't you think, Joseph, these situations and you see priests going along with that as well. You have gay men getting married. Now, they knew when they were gay that being gay, very part and parcel of it is that you're more than likely never going to have children. So you sort of accepted that, But now you have all these gay men getting married, and all of a sudden they all want to play house.
Yeah.
They all want to have a rose-covered cottage, and they want to have 2.5 children, and they want to be PTA moms, and I think what it is they're simply trying to gain some kind of social acceptance. So if they're seen as parents, as concerned parents, everyone will accept them, and then that can normalize the whole thing. But the thing is, it's at the expense of the children. And
Mm-hmm.
it may be one thing for a gay couple to adopt 5-year-old, 6-year-old children, that unfortunately no one wants and no one's adopting, and those children would otherwise end up in a foster home for God knows how long. It's one thing maybe for gay men to adopt children like that. But for gay men, like Ricky Martin and others, to go out and hire a surrogate
Yeah.
and bring new life into the world, deliberately depriving that new life of a biological mother and a normal family situation, I feel is irresponsible.
Um,
And you have that, and you have priests, christening the children and everything. There's
oh,
the
it
two
it goes
daddies,
on in the
mommies,
Catholic Church. Yeah.
and they're christening the children. My goodness, years ago, you couldn't even be a godparent unless you were, halfway decent and moral, Uh,
I think,
now,
yeah,
there's
I think children should be raised in a family that includes a husband and a wife.
right.
I mean, that is just that's a non-negotiable. I think I don't know. The tragedy of unwanted children doesn't mean that these kids should be put into situations that are less than ideal. It's a disaster. I don't know. And I'm just curious, real quick, too, because I mean, I'm in a Russian Orthodox church as well, and I can't imagine any kind of thing like this going on, where
Yeah.
of a highly placed member of the clergy or the hierarchy is talking about raising your gay kids. I mean, it would just be unthinkable. So,
Well, that's why we have, the Orthodox Church has some organizations which, many of us have discovered that are trying to help gay people to reorientate themselves and to be able to live, chaste and celibate lives. And that's what the church should be doing. Now, a lot of people may say, well, how come the Orthodox Church doesn't have special gay organizations, within the church? I remember years ago, I used to go to a Catholic, one of those organization. I'm trying to remember what it was called. Gay Dignity.
Dignity, I used to go to that as well.
Yeah, but gay
what a
puberty was
disaster.
little more than a mass with dating following the mass, you know?
It was a gay tea party with the mass. It
Yeah,
was really
exactly.
despicable.
Exactly. So it wasn't really helping anybody. It's the church's responsibility to help gay people to, to cultivate
And
uh, their celibacy
yeah,
and to rechannel their sexual energies into something useful. It could be a career, it could be monasticism, it could be, becoming help aides to the sick or whatever. The fact that we're single and we have this time and ability and everything, yeah, we could rechannel, that sexual energy. Uh, and that's what the church should be helping us to do. And the only
that's
reason, like I said, that the Orthodox Church doesn't have those special programs is because they've noticed that in other churches that do, those
yes,
programs invariably just turn into dating services and they also become politicized.
yes, yes, yes.
So now you start polarizing the church, and you have half of the church is pro-gay, and the other half of the church is anti-gay, and that's just very destructive of the church.
Don't segregate people that have this particular issue into their own group, because then you're like confirming the identity, especially if you call it like an LGBT same-sex attraction or whatever group. I think what is good in Orthodoxy is, I think, people people just find healing sort of organically, just
Right.
as a fellow sinner in the parish, rather than somebody with a particular uh, fetish or whatever. I don't think it's good to do that. Um,
No, in fact, when you think of it, it's almost insulting to
yeah,
segregate gay people within the church, and have this special little organization just for gay people when sin is sin.
yeah.
Uh, and what gay people are suffering from is the same thing that heterosexual single people are suffering from. They're suffering from sexual addiction, and they need to be helped with their sexual addiction. They need to, bring themselves under control. And so to segregate us into a totally separate group is again like either marginalizing us or making our sexuality our identity.
Hmm.
Identity is children of God. Our identity
Yeah,
is not our sexuality. You
yeah,
know,
yeah. I thought this, I wanted to share this. It's interesting. This is from Richard Ise. He was a psychiatrist, let's see, psychoanalyst. He was gay himself, a very early gay rights advocate who, he was somebody that's instrumental in changing the way, mental health looked at gay people. They didn't, pathologize them anymore. And he said the majority of gay men, unlike heterosexual men, who come for treatment report that their fathers were distant during their childhood and that they lacked any attachment to them. Reports vary from my father was never around. He was too busy with his job. Uh, Two, he was victimized by my mother, who was always the boss of the family, to that of the abusive, unapproachable father. So I think that really hits home to what I think we've been talking about. And here we have, a gay activist psychologist, admitting that.
yeah.
So,
Can
uh,
I just, Joseph, if you'll permit me,
of
because
course.
this fits right in with this, and it's really crucial. Uh, there was a happy ending with myself and my father. When he got a little bit older, and his my stepmother divorced him, and he was alone, I began filling in and spending a lot more time with him because my brother was married and raising a family and all that. So I had the time. So I would always have him over every Saturday morning for coffee, and we would talk and everything. And finally, one day we sat down and we had a serious talk. This was like years after him saying, "You saved this one last disappointment, for my old age." And we sat down and we had it out. And my father said that he had felt that I had always hated him. Uh,
Mm,
and I wanted nothing to do with him. And the proof of that for him was when I left him in his grieving over my mother's death and went
Mm,
off to New York to be with Jehovah's Witnesses.
mm.
And he felt that I had hated him and wanted nothing to do with him. And I explained to him as I says, but Dad, you don't understand. I says, I felt the same way. I says, in our entire life, you never touched me. You never touched me. You never rocked me on your knee. You never touched me. And then when I was going away to New York to the Watchtower Society, yeah, you were invited to my going away party, and we shook hands like two
Mm.
CEOs. Yeah. I said, we shook hands and we both expressed how we had inadvertently hurt each other. And at that point, we embraced and we cried, and everything was good after that.
Wow.
And I was with him right down to his death.
Oh,
And it was to a point where I would come to the hospital to visit him, and he'd ask me to hold his hand, you know.
that's
And
beautiful.
I said, well, of course I'll hold your hand, but I'm just curious, why do you want me to hold your hand? And he says, because when you're holding my hand, I feel like nothing bad can happen to me, you know?
Oh,
And that was just so marvelous. And the other side of that too was
oh,
during that whole period when my father and I were reunited, I had no sexual urges. I stopped going out. I stopped chasing men. I stopped having any need for any of that because all I had ever really wanted was either my father's love or my brother's love or the love, of another man. And now I had it,
mm,
you know.
that's
And
beautiful.
so it made a big difference in my sexual needs. My sexual needs like disappeared, absolutely disappeared. And I would like, struggling young Orthodox men to realize that if you have a good relationship with your biological father or your brother or a priest and confessor or whatever, your sexual needs will really, really dwindle, and it's going to really help you, you know.
I
But
agree.
that's what we need, like Father Hans always says, we need that male relationship, you
I
know.
agree.
But a non-sexual, you male relationship, But I couldn't get over how much of a difference that made. Once my father and I were okay with each other, made all the difference in the world. And of course, then my father died, but now I have our Lord. So, and it's not like people say, yeah, but he's like, a million miles away in heaven. No, I don't feel that way. I feel he's right here. And every morning I say good morning and I say my prayers and so God is my lover. The
Oh,
Lord
God
is my
bless
Lord.
you.
And that makes all the difference in the world.
This kind of fits into what you were talking about. And it's my last quote. This is Dr. Simon LeVay. Now, when you talk about someone looking for the gay gene, this is the guy that's been at the top of the list that's done. He's a neurobiologist, Harvard, Salk Institute, all the qualifications. He wrote, there are probably very few people who have not, at some time or another, some sexual attraction to both men and women. A person's sexual orientation is not necessarily a fixed, lifelong attribute. Sexual orientation can change. So, to people that say, well, that's just the way you are and forget it, people can change because I think you hit on that too, and and yeah, I think people need to have hope. Is it those things can come and go, and I think part and parcel of a healing. There's definitely a spiritual aspect to that, and I think instrumental to that is for people that suffer with this issue is that they have good friendships with people of the same sex that are heterosexual, and that's men. You need to have good friendships with preferably married husbands and fathers, and women. You need to have good friendships with uh, married, wives and mothers, because then you'll see examples of what, true masculinity and femininity are like. But also, is it, you know, part of the healing process is uh, healing those old traumas and those old wounds, like what you described with, uh, the relationship with your father being paired. And, not that's not a possibility with everybody because maybe their parents are dead or their parents are so toxic or something they can't, you know, do that. But I think you can successfully repair, those old wounds in other ways. So that's my little two bits. And anything else, Alexis? Anything that I don't know that you want to end with, or I think your story is a good example. I was talking about examples, and so thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, no, I think both of us are pretty much in sync, throughout our discussion. That we're both basically saying the same thing, is that people aren't born gay.
No,
People end up maybe being gay as a result of a lot of circumstances all coming together, you know.
and it was different generations because you're a boomer and I'm Gen X, and then that scenario played out in your era, played out in mine, and then the tragedy of history is people don't learn from the past. Is it's still playing out today for children who have been traumatized and abused and neglected are going in this direction, thinking that that's kind of going to answer all their questions, and it doesn't. So hopefully people can learn from the
Right. I want to thank
past.
you so much for having me on here today, Joseph, because this is very important to me. One of my friends said, "Do you really want to expose yourself on YouTube?" And I said, "Yeah, if it can help people, it's worth it."
Why not? And you will help one person at least, but I know there'll be more. And if just one person hears this and says, "Oh, hey, there's hope for me. I can do something else." Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
God bless.